Okay, we are live. Everyone, put on your smiling faces, any makeup if necessary. Greetings and good afternoon, everybody. And James just had something on there he took out. You can put it back on for a second, James. That's it. That's it. And it looks like these folks have just landed in Thailand. As you normally get those wonderful, colorful flowers in Thailand. I also speak Thai, for those of you who don't know. Okay, welcome everyone. Really excited to be here. We got Andy, David, James, and myself, and we're going to talk about understanding organizational context for tangible. And I think the key word here is context and tangible security improvements. Some deep insights, real insights from the folks who are at the coal face, who are doing this on a daily basis. They understand the pain. They understand the challenges, the configurations, the humans throwing stuff at them, and then how they throw stuff back. So quite exciting. So everyone, please take 1 minute to establish who you are, what you do, and we'll carry on from there. David, start with you, sir.
Okay, so I'm David Willis. I'm head of cyber governance and assurance for Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership. So the partnership is effectively an STP. We've got about 560 GPs. We've got getting on for 30 secondary care organisations, probably employing around 80,000 staff across multiple sites, looking after about 3.5 million patients a year. So my role is strategic. My role is to try and get people to use technologies that work.
Excellent.
And that's why I'm here today.
Not a small challenge. Excellent. Thank you for that. David, James?
Co-founder of Quarter Cloud. My job is to introduce technology that works to people like David and Andy, bringing new and emerging technology to the market, understanding the pain points and how we can help solve them by consultancy-led advice.
Excellent. Yes, and thanks to Quarter Cloud for hosting this and bringing some interesting folks together to share their insights. Andrew. Yep. You're on mute. That's okay. Still on mute. That's
Apologies.
Okay, there we go.
There we go, the technology. Yeah, Andy McArdle. I work for Blackpool Teaching Hospitals, NHS Foundation Trust. I'm the head of network infrastructure and telecoms. So a bit of a wide-ranging remit, looking after the networks, the sort of perimeter security, switchboard, all the telephony around the trust. We look after organisations such as Blackpool and Filed Wire CCGs. We've got private organisations that are affiliated to the NHS that are on our network as well. Yeah, and obviously security comes under that, which is where today's presentation comes in.
Excellent. Okay, folks, I'm going to kind of launch the discussion. A little bit about me. Blue Turban, that's not a sauna I'm sitting in. It's a log cabin, also known as a man cave. For the next time, I'll be ready with the green screen and have some funky background. But for today, you got to see the dinosaur drone at the back there, bought in somewhere 2013. But anyway, the more important discussion today is visibility. As you would imagine, we have the NHS here, and scale is an understatement in the NHS, right? And complexity is also an understatement, and kind of holding on to skilled staff at the various levels is also a challenge. Now, if we talk about visibility, you in the environment, and David and Andrew are going to share much more insight, but regardless of organization, one of the biggest headaches is, yes, you can procure a lot of technology to protect yourself, but I think anybody would agree someone's going to make it in. The question is, once they are in, if you have a completely pitch black, dark room with zero visibility, or maybe one or two candles lit on, you are not going to be able to actually see anything. And that's the best, probably, an analogy, simple one that I can give. And unless you have the technology, the configured technology, and then the necessary data analyst and the data analysis technology to make sense of all this data that you're collecting, you're still going to be at a losing end, because the criminal is going to get in, right? And it's not just about threat intelligence. I'm trying to summarize a lot of things. Threat intelligence is good, but you know what? The determined attacker may bypass all your threat intelligence. They may develop a brand new malware. So you've got to look at it from many, many different angles. And I'm really excited. We're going to hear from the likes of David and Andy, who are going to give us, as I said, the challenges they are facing on a daily level, and the benefits of how they are using certain technologies to gain their visibility. Am I making sense? I hope I am to everyone. A couple of quick reminders. This webinar and other webinars that we have done with this Core to Cloud Virtual Festival, you can download a good collateral now and afterwards, and you can always come back and view these webinars and make sure you get the golden nuggets you're looking for. David, if I may start with you. James, you can obviously kind of step in, but David, how have you been solving this problem?
Okay, so I'd like to actually touch a little bit on my background with all this stuff. So about 15 years ago, I implemented intrusion detection within the NHS data centres for the Spine project. We used a product at that time made by IBM called ISS intrusion prevention. It could be used as intrusion prevention and intrusion detection, but it would tell you if things were going wrong within your network. We switched it on, and I was getting 260 million events a day. 126 million of those related to unauthenticated SQL access. Well, when that SQL access is to patient databases on national IT systems, that's kind of important. It took me 6-7 months to baseline the system and bring it into a usable system. It took 4 months to figure out that the 126 million events around inappropriate access to the system were actually a bug in Microsoft SQL 2003 and were nothing to do with anybody trying to penetrate the system. But that work was hard. It really is difficult when you start looking at packets flying around your network to understand what's going on, because millions of them are happening every second. Some of that traffic may be malicious. Most of it is completely normal and within acceptable boundaries. The thing is that your environment isn't stable. Your environment will change. All it takes is for somebody to put the wrong link into a web browser. All it takes is for somebody to download an inappropriate piece of software without realizing it, and that will change the behavior in your network. Trying to control that behavior from a console where you're just watching what's going on and hoping for the best is almost impossible. But Vectra is a little bit different. Vectra will give you visibility of what's going on, and will give you the ability to block things if they are inappropriate. And that's really important, because you do not have the ability to respond in real time in the same way that malware and bad guys have the ability to impact on your environment in real time.
David, sorry to interrupt you there, if you don't mind. And we're going to talk about Vectra, the solution, how it helped. But if you can I quickly just go to James before coming back to you, David. James, if you can give a bit of a background as to how you approach this particular problem, because you are a solution provider. How did you approach this particular problem, and why you selected Vectra in this case, in this context of David? And then I'll come to you, David and Andy, of how you're using it, etc. But James, if you take a few minutes.
I mean, we've got some slides that I was going to show.
Yeah, why not?
Get on to that. Okay, cool.
Yep.
I have to say that they're not actually mine. This is from Brett Walmsley, the CTO at Bolton Hospitals, which was one of the first customers around the technology that we're talking around today. And yeah, he knows how to do this stuff. I don't. So yeah. Right, just a bit of an intro. I mean, the area that really kind of back when I first worked on visibility and detection technology, I was challenged by Royal Bolton Hospitals to find a solution that would give them visibility into their network and surface attacks in real time, which is obviously the kind of gap, the challenge really with most of the organisations that we've been working with. When I was speaking to NHS customers, a lot of people were looking at SIEM technology, but at that time, you know, it's a lot of money, SIEM solutions, and it takes a lot of people to manage the amount of events. And to be quite honest with you, most of the NHS customers that I work with, that we'll probably get into in a minute, you know, they're really struggling in terms of resources and also in terms of funding. So the challenge was predominantly around, you know, threat detection, real time, but without drowning the resources or having to add new resources, or, you know, filling that gap. So we found a solution which is called Vectra, AI-based threat detection response solution, and I was actually going to let Andy talk around how he's using it within his network rather than myself. I mean, Andy, can I pass the buck over to you, mate?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, my background within the NHS was mainly to do with networks. Security came as a bit of a sideline. We didn't or don't have a dedicated security team, so it's been a case of upskilling in various areas. We had tools like NetFlow, intrusion prevention and firewalls and all the usual kind of good security stuff. But we looked at it and saw that we had a bit of a weakness in that we couldn't see what was going on across the network. We could see a little bit in NetFlow as to the kind of ports and protocols that were being used and so on, but we needed to improve that visibility. And speaking to James and obviously getting Core to Cloud's advice, Vectra was the solution that fit the bill for us. And we went to see it at Bolton and so on to get a feel of how it would work. So we've had it in place now for about 2 years. And obviously as time gone on, the machine learning and so on of the product has detected what normal behavior looks like, and highlights to us anything that goes outside of that norm. So we were seeing things like HTTPS tunnels were being built from our network outside to external parties. Obviously within an NHS network, we've got a lot of devices such as medical devices and things that aren't necessarily directly under the remit of the IT team. So being able to see what's going on and being able to see what those devices are doing has been key to being able to make sure that we've got those protections in place and we can control those devices in a secure way. A lot of the stuff we were seeing was perfectly legitimate, but we didn't necessarily know that it was happening until we got Vectra in place. We could see things like data exfiltration, which again we knew was legitimate and going to places that we knew about, but where was the source of that data? Where were they gathering that data, and where was it going, and how much data was going? All that became visible once Vectra was in place, and we could see things like port sweeps and scans and things like that taking place on the network, which in general was local IT people, but it gave us that visibility to see what was going on. When the penetration testers came and did the annual penetration tests, it lit up like a Christmas tree, and we could see that all these different attacks and recon was taking place. So we knew that if someone else brought one of those tools in, we'd be able to see that happening and know that someone was attempting to hack the network. So yeah, there's all sorts of things that we could see. We could validate controls were working. It's a really, really useful tool. I won't drone on and on.
That's, no, I appreciate that.
No, yeah, sorry, James, if I may just briefly, Andy, that's absolutely relevant, and that's the point. But James, carry on with this. There are several questions I want to ask Andy, but let's go through Because these slides are quite important to give the context.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a common kind of requirement across the NHS, is that they needed to be able to detect abnormal behaviour or potential threats across the network, but without having to drown in terms of alerts and having alert fatigue. Really, for example, we plugged in this device once within an NHS site. Obviously, I can't name names, but we've seen IoT medical devices pinging out with conflict on, and clinical applications getting compromised and starting to communicate with other systems and accounts such as payroll or HR. And that's really kind of the joys of Vectra, because it's obviously designed specifically to find and detect malicious behavior and attacks. So it kind of really fit in quite well, because it wasn't draining the team, it was adding more resource to NHS teams, and that really was the kind of key value. It gives the NHS ability to focus on patient care, and that's something that I often speak to with Brett and Andy and David and many other NHS trusts that we talk to. It's always focused on time, response, patient care. If one of these applications, these clinical applications or clinical systems go down, even for a short period of time, that's lives that could be implicated. So it kind of just fit in so well from an automation and response perspective. That visibility, that knowing the unknown and being able to respond promptly was really key, really, Amar. It kind of just gives you a bit of a bit of background around how it kind of really works. It sits at the core part of the network. It monitors and it takes a copy of all the data. And you can monitor and detect east to west and north south traffic in seconds. I think I'll stop sharing the slides now to have a bit more of a chat about it.
No, excellent. That's really useful. So a question has come in for Andy. Hi, Andy. Did the tool give you a good insight into internal data flows? It's a good question. Internal data
absolutely.
flows. Can you expand that a little?
Yeah, absolutely. The tool, obviously there's two elements to the tool that we're using, which is Cognito Detect and the recall function. The detect function giving us the alerts for things that are happening on the network that maybe we want to pay attention to. The beauty of that particular side of the tool is that it only really alerts us to what we really need to look at, which keeps it quite nice and quiet, because we've got a small team of people, and being able to focus on the things that really need attention is important. A really simple UI, which is really nice as well. So you can see exactly where you're going. It's not too difficult to manipulate. But in order to see what's going on internally on your network, there's all sorts of built-in graphs and data that shows the kind of protocols and things that are being used on your network, the volume of data that's transferring, so you can nicely baseline what's normal and visualize that. But it gives you that deeper delve as well, where you can investigate traffic that's passing east to west and see through all that metadata, quite granular, how data is flowing around your network. It's really, really useful.
Okay. Good questions coming in. David, if I may go to you, if you answer one question and then I'll move around. So another question is, did implementing Vectra have an impact on your technical staff resource time? In terms of learning curve, I'm assuming that's the angle.
So I think the implementation was one of the joys of this, because Quarter Cloud did the implementation. A couple of guys were needed to watch to learn what was going on. Full training is available to staff who are going to be maintaining it, but the actual installation, implementation, and first live runs are done for you, and the evidence from that can be shown to you. It really does work very well.
Okay. There's another question coming, which is, I think James, you can help me with that very briefly. Are there any documented case studies? NHS Bolton, correct?
Yes, yeah.
So, and that should be for everyone listening in. That should be this
On
way.
our website.
If you look in the Core to Cloud website, and or the document may also be available in the downloads section. If you look at the bottom end of your screen when you're watching this particular webinar, that's a good question. Yes, and documented case studies are always very helpful. David, I'm going to come back to you. There's another question here. Hold on. With remote working exploding, or rather becoming the complete norm, has this changed in user device behavior? David, you and Andy, I want both your insights into this. It's a good question. In where you are in the NHS, remote working is becoming the norm. Not maybe much in the NHS, but everywhere else. What are you seeing in terms of behavior?
Andy, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, the obviously the COVID-19 situation has definitely changed behaviour. We back in February, we probably only had around about 60 concurrent remote workers. That was slowly increasing up to early March, but then in the space of 2 weeks, we had 3,700 laptops configured with the ability to work remotely, and we had 1,000 of those connected concurrently during the day.
Wow.
So Vectra definitely saw that. I mean, obviously it depends on your network design, but our remote access comes in through sites that are all being monitored by Vectra. So we saw definite changes in network traffic patterns. It highlighted those to us, things like it was seeing IT engineers working from home, so it could see that people with elevated privileged user accounts were now accessing from IP addresses and hosts that they'd not usually been seen from, which obviously if it wasn't IT staff would be really relevant for your cybersecurity posture. We were seeing potential attack campaigns because there was hundreds of devices all connecting to systems hosted on HSCN, and Microsoft Teams had been rolled out. So it was thinking that maybe there was data exfiltration out to external sites and so on. So yeah, it was quite an insight.
And if I may, David, before I come back to you, I think it's very important to understand that's just because someone is working from remote is not bad behavior or malicious behavior, and that's where the human element has to kick in and contextualize that event and put and use their gut instinct, their contextual awareness, and the organizational reality and the situational reality of, for example, the pandemic. And Andy, thank you. David, what are your thoughts on this?
Okay, so I think the proliferation of remote working across Greater Manchester has been phenomenal. I know that Greater Manchester Shared Services, who do a lot of work for GPs and such like, a chunk of their virtual infrastructure now is solely put aside for dealing with remote working. From the perspective of Vectra, and I'm going to use Brett's examples here, Vectra lit up when people started working from home. It showed anomalous behavior. People were prepared for things like MS Teams because it had been rolled out, so MS Teams wasn't something to worry about. What shocked them was that not everybody was using MS Teams, so a lot of WebEx, a lot of screen sharing through WebEx, and this wasn't necessarily expected. This is frontline staff using tools to talk to other organisations who didn't have Teams. But all of a sudden, you've got full visibility of this. You can check it out really quickly, and you can put it in that this is now normal behavior.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Another question, and this is David coming back to you. And this is when, just before this particular webinar, we were discussing, and you mentioned specifically, how Vectra has been of value, right?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned, if I recall, firewalls. Someone made change, and you saw. Can you give some examples that actually kind of, that's when you go, oh wow, this is really useful, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So a live example from the use of Vectra, which I've witnessed. One of the organisations within Greater Manchester was using Vectra, and they'd recently taken over responsibility for their GPs. They weren't sure of the network that the GPs were sat on, so they were insulating their own acute network from the GP network. And somebody came in with a very simple request. A GP had a scanner, copier, printer, and they wanted to be able to scan, copy, print to their own email box within NHS.net mail. Now, it's not a difficult thing to do. The simple query was, do you want this to go across our network and out to NHS.net mail, or do you want to bounce it straight from the firewall straight to NHS.net mail so it just works? And the sensible response, because they didn't want to open up the internal acute network, was bounce it. And we then just looked at the console, and probably about 60 seconds later, red flag goes up, you've had a firewall rule change. And you could drill down into that firewall rule change. You could see who did it, what the rule was before it was changed, what the rule was after the change, and the time that it occurred. That kind of detail is absolutely phenomenal, because if somebody starts changing rules on your firewall or on your VPN system, and you can go to that person and say, you did it, did you do it? No problems. And you confirm it, that's fine. If they didn't do it and somebody else is using that account, that's a different problem. But that instant visibility is absolutely phenomenal.
Excellent. That's a really good example. And I think, again, time to value is of importance, which you've touched on, and we'll go that a little bit more. Let's take a look. We are flooded with questions today, which is very good. Keep them coming in. In the virtual world, talking about east to west traffic, does it matter if you have a traditional setup or use container orchestration, or is this not relevant? Let's park that for now. Hold on. Where does Vectra sit? Is it an agent on each point, and how resource? That's a good question in terms of resource intensiveness. Who wants to take that, Andy or David?
Andy, do you want to give them a...
Yeah, sure. So in our particular deployment, the Vectra is deployed as an appliance that spans a port into your network. So we plug it directly into our core switch at our main site. That takes a feed and a mirror of pretty much nearly all our VLANs within our core. So it's getting a span of pretty much all the data going through that core network. We've also got virtual sensors deployed within our VMware environment, so we can see what's going on directly within there. And you can deploy sensors as well if there's traffic that's not passing through the particular area where you put your main brain. You can put sensors out in other areas that feeds all that metadata back to the brain and does its analysis. So yeah, and then as far as the resources go, obviously the resources are purely on those sensors and brains, so it's completely separate from the rest of our infrastructure, the way that we've got it deployed.
I was going to add, Andy. Well, when I go and see Andy and the team, I have to make sure I bring Krispy Kremes, of course. And but Andy always has the dashboard up, and it's funny when we speak to people at first and like, I can't handle new technology. I completely understand why, because all of these organizations that we work with have so many different solutions, and some vendors say, oh, you should have this one technology that fits all. But I mean, I've always had the mentality of a kind of an onion based approach in terms of cyber. But this particular solution, I mean, David, you mentioned earlier around kind of building that baseline and the amount of events that you would see from an intrusion detection perspective. You know, Andy, whenever I go in there, I swear you're just gloating, Andy, just because you got 000. But you know, when there's something that's on there, you know that there's a problem. Am I right? You know, so
yeah, absolutely. That was one of the key benefits of the solution that we were looking for when we went setting out for looking to fix the issues that we had. We didn't want something that was going to be alerting us 1,000 times a day. We just don't have the resource to look into that. And if you're getting 1,000 things a day, then either you've got real problems or you're being alerted to things that you don't need to know about.
Absolutely. I think if you have if you have 1,000 things a day to do alerts, then you need to sit back and review your alerts. Couldn't agree more. So I have a question, and we were touching on this basically a little bit in the discussion earlier today. Actually, there was another webinar, a panel. So data, right? How important is good quality data? You implement Vectra. David, I'll start with you first, and then I'll come to you, Andy. But implementing, I guess, is, dare I say, the easy bit. You get change control, you plug in the device. But how do you ensure it is spanning? I understand from the span port, but how do you check on the quality of data? David?
It's a good question with no easy answer. You are to a point reliant on the tool, but as you are operating the tool, you will start to become aware if there are problems with the tool, simply because you will be investigating the more serious incidents.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is that most organizations will not see serious incidents. What they will see is incidents, and those incidents may not be an example of somebody exfiltrating, they may not be an example of somebody hacking or an example of malware. They may well just be a device has gone offline. Why has it gone offline? Because it shouldn't go offline. You go, you investigate, you find out, you rapidly begin to figure out whether the data the system is giving you is appropriate and fit for purpose.
Andy, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly some basic things that you can look at. There's network statistics, so you can see the kind of throughput that's going through the box and whether that's what you would expect. You can see the number of IP addresses of hosts that go through the box. We have around about 19,000 IP addresses or hosts that are seen communicating through the box at any one time during the day. And what I would say as well is that the Vectra themselves do health checks and quality checks with you to make sure that things are working properly and as they would expect to see. So there are a few things that you can do, yeah.
I think I was going to add as well on that front of the recall function within Vectra, which is all about the data, and that's built a data lake in AWS that feeds all the metadata into, and then you can run Lucene queries against that data. But one of the trusts that I work with, one search that he did was password .doc and pulling all that data back, and it was just quite surprising how many users keep a document of all their passwords on their machine. It's brilliant.
It's one of those searches you don't want to run.
Yeah. And if you run any like that?
Yeah, we built. You can build specific search tools where you look for different elements, and password.doc was one of the searches we did, which actually instigated a little piece of work for our information governance team to go out and start educating users a bit more into not doing that.
So are you saying auditors are going to love this tool basically because you can do a lot of quick audits and give them the results?
Absolutely, yeah. There's no end to the kind of searches that you can do once you're familiar with getting those searches created.
There's several questions that are coming up in my head, and a couple of them here, but quick one. One, I want to talk about, David and Andy, how you're using recall. But two, what happens, as question has come up, and this was a concept in the, dare I say, the archaic SIEM days, if a log source goes silent, right? Am I making sense to everyone, right? So if something stops generating data. So my question is, and the question that I see is, and I'm just rephrasing that question, once a critical device stops generating data, because that's what a good attacker is going to try to do, they're going to either stop the logging process for a while, or am I making sense, right? So how would, in your experience, I'm sure you must have seen this, either accidental or malicious, but what happens? Take me through to what happens on the analyst screen.
Andy, do you want to cover this from the point of view of a device goes down? It's a change in behaviour on the network, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if I understand the question correctly, obviously Vectra itself is looking at behaviours as opposed to logs. So if something stops communicating, it wouldn't necessarily highlight that behaviour. If it communicates in a different behaviour, so it starts communicating with things it's never communicated with before in a strange way or something like that, then obviously it would notify you to those kind of things. But it's not, unless you choose to send logs to it, it's not actually looking at logs.
I understand, because there's, I mean, yeah, and I'm trying to compare to the, like I said, the bygone era of traditional SIEM, where and we still see clients spending a lot of time chasing devices that have stopped logging, if you see what I mean, right? Without the context. So that's the angle I'm trying to, I think this question is coming from, is so that's in a good way, that's what you're saying, Andy, is in this particular context, Vectra does not necessarily focus on that. It is focusing on, over time, changing behavior. Am I making sense?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's very good to know. A couple of more questions. Hold on. Is Vectra an alternative to a traditional SIEM tool, like, I'm not going to name them necessarily, like the dinosaur SIEM world?
Oh.
David, you first, and then Andy.
Okay, so from my personal perspective, there's kind of a maturity curve for organizations, and SIEM tools sit sort of near the top of that. Vectra can feed into that. The challenge is actually being able to afford to and have the resource, staff-wise, trained people to implement one of the solutions that's being suggested. None of them are cheap. All of them are resource intensive. So on the national program, they implemented Logarithm, and a contract was brought in. That contract was earning 5 times my daily salary, and spent 6 months attempting to implement Logarithm, and it never worked. That's nothing against the contractor, it's nothing against the product. The thing is, it's this, how quickly do you get a return on what you've put in there?
Time
with
to value.
SIEM tools, you could spend months, years trying to figure out what's going wrong and what you need to attach and how to make it work and how to translate those log files into something that the tool can make sense of. With Vectra, you switch it on and you watch the thing light up and you watch it learn.
And on that question, sorry, James, before, if you don't mind, sorry, very briefly, the learning process, and James, you can contribute to this question also. The learning process of embedding Vectra, is there a minimum that Vectra recommends, or Andy and David, in your experience, James, how long does it take before clients see real value? It's got to build some normality and the picture of the organization, right?
So typically when we work, so for example, Andy, we may as well use how we worked on the project with you. Andy and I spoke quite a while ago. Andy was looking into the technology. He was also looking at comparison to the solution. We ship the appliance. We do a configuration call, just span the ports, make sure we're seeing the traffic. And then a week later, we have what we call a detection review. And that's where Andy and ourselves and the technical team of Vectra, we discuss what we're seeing, and it's been sat there in listening and learning mode for a week. And what you obviously at first, you got quite a few alerts because you also, it's assisted machine learning as well as machine learning. So you assist it by triaging what the normal behavior is. And then once, after a couple of weeks, if not 2-3, we then look at running a penetration test with an automated pen testing tool that we work with to prove the value of the solution by showing them this is what will happen and this is what you should expect should an attack occur. So it's a weekly kind of hour and a half worth of training, and it's training the individual that's manning the solution. But also, you know, it's just good insight into the network, really, what's going on, because most people just really have not seen this kind of, you know, just haven't had visibility like this since they've come across the likes of the technology. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, everything you're saying rings true there. The training, I would say, it's quite an intuitive system. I think it's one that certainly most IT professionals would pick up things as they go. The detection reviews with Vectra and Core to Cloud certainly help with your learning. You get to understand and ask the questions that where you need some answers. But within the Vectra system itself, when it has the detections, it actually has descriptions of what that behavior is and what it might be and how you might potentially fix that issue, or what it suggests you might want to do. So it is really good.
Okay. Many questions coming in. I think another good question is, I think there may be some NHS folks also listening in who are curious. How does the costing model work? Is it per asset? James, for user subscription? No selling.
Well, it's licensed based on IP. And
Right.
then there is a recall function in terms of data, yeah, I mean, it's per IP basis, and then hardware. Typically, the hardware is not really where these vendors make their money anymore, if I'm honest with you. It's really down to the software, the machine learning, the data scientists that are building these algorithms, and that's really where they make their buck. But yeah, it's per IP, physical appliance.
Okay, excellent. Recall, and I wanted to talk on that. Not total recall. No, we're talking about the recall function. Using AWS, did Andy or David, or both of you, I guess, have to complete, it's a good question, a DPIA, data privacy impact assessment, to allow the main network AD data and metadata being harvested?
I'll let you answer that one.
Okay, so from my perspective, I also do the governance thing on this one. A DPIA is designed at high risk data sharing. It's up to your organization to make an individual call on whether one should be completed, and that's down to the organization's risk appetite. What you're going to harvest from this is AD names. So it's going to be the names on individual accounts. You're going to get IP numbers, but those are not, and they will be identifiable potentially to an individual, but really it's down to your organization to decide whether a DPIA needs to be completed.
Absolutely, and I guess within many would argue, and this could be a separate webinar on its own, within the reasonable expectations and legitimate reasons, an organization that already needs to monitor anyway. I think it only gets really critical when it gets into profiling. And I don't think we are talking about profiling any particular employee in any sense whatsoever in this particular context. So good question, but I want to stay on recall for a second. What other features are you using of recall? Andy, if you don't mind, take that first. How useful is it in terms of recall? Yes, but you're looking at detection, you said, and you're looking at recall. So sure. What is the true benefit of recall to you, and what does it do?
Yeah, just using one example. Over time, occasionally we would get the NHS Digital Care Cert alert where there's a potential cyber threat. It's detected some anomalous behaviour and it's highlighted an IP address or a connection out to a website maybe. We could use we could use recall to find what machines have been speaking to that destination within a few clicks, and obviously get the behavior of whatever that machine is prior to that connection to that destination. So it gives us that good intelligence. There's a lot of safe searches that are pre-built by Vectra within the recall solution.
Okay.
So you can do things like search for where insecure protocols on your network are being used, like maybe FTP or Telnet.
Very good.
where SMB version 1's being used, where weak ciphers are maybe being used on your network. And like I said earlier, you can use recall and the dashboards within there to baseline what normal behavior looks like. So if you're used to seeing so many RDP connections and RPC calls during a day, and you see a massive spike in those, then you can see that something has changed, and no doubt you would get the detections to go with that on the Cognito dashboard.
A quick question, David and Andy, for this one. In terms of operational friendliness, it's something I bring up many times as a CISO. It's brilliant to have great technology, but unless the people on the ground can use it easily, and unless it's friendly to use, you can have the best firefighter or rather jet or whatever, but if no one knows how to operate it, it's of zero value. So in terms of training people, I know you touched on it briefly, but is it fairly straightforward to use?
I think I'll start this one from. So I think Andy's already said yes. I mean, I've seen the front end on this one. It is really simple and user friendly to use. I've seen front ends for various cyber security systems. This is definitely one of the friendlier ones. Andy, your thoughts?
Yeah, particularly the Cognito, the detection side of things, it's really friendly to use. The recall side is a little bit more complex.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm not familiar with Lucene, but within a day or so of using it, I'd already picked up quite a few of the techniques to allow me, even at a basic level, to be able to search for everything that I wanted to search for. Obviously, it can get a lot more complex than that, and people professional in using Lucene will be able to do a lot more than I will. Right. However, it certainly allows me to do what I need to.
I mean, we could carry on with this for another 1 or 2 hours, I know, but hey, guys, time is running out. The one thing I want to kind of talk about, this is brilliant. This is automated. It does a lot of the heavy lifting, as I understand, which I'm a massive fan of, the heavy lifting at a very important layer. And I've said this before, I'm on record on saying this. A bored IT staff, bored analyst, or someone who is demotivated analyst is a very big risk to an organization, right? And a tool like this that we're talking about, Vectra, that is doing a lot of the menial, the manual, repetitive tasks, bringing everything together is absolutely. I think it must. When you are assessing anything, whether you want to buy Vectra or not, but when you are assessing something like this, it should be right at the top of your must-have rather than good to have, in my professional opinion, right? So must be able to do a lot of the heavy lifting, the enrichment, the context of an incident before it goes in front of the analyst's dashboard, because it's very demeaning and demotivating. I've done this in my life, being an analyst in the ISS days, as you were saying, Andy. Sorry, David. And it's very demotivating when you have to do who is paying every single time for every alert. And that's what gets people bored and they leave, because the opportunity to really enrich their mind and their knowledge goes away, because you're spending all your time saving a screenshot, making sure you know the trace route, etc., etc. So now that we've done automated at that level, one of the biggest challenges I see is the wonderful world of pen testing. And I just want to touch on it a little, right? To me, I'm always looking for automated pen testing, and I've had the pleasure with James, to review a product called SIEM, right? And to me, that's another really critical angle to allow the analyst to learn, because the basic automation and advanced automation of not just trying to do a vulnerability assessment, but trying to break in. So if you kind of couple that with something like Vectra, you are in a very, very good position, because you are automatically trying to break in, right? And then you're also putting Vectra to a constant test rather than doing it on a yearly basis. Your Vectra is becoming better, as I would hope, because it is constantly learning and building context. Am I making sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Any comments by James? You want to start first? Yeah.
It's funny because obviously where you're talking there, obviously Amar, I know you've introduced a few people to speak to me around SIES, and actually SIES was the first ever UK customer was Bolton Hospitals. And they were the first to ever, all sectors to purchase this solution. And we validate Vectra as part of our POC process with SIES. And for us, automation is, speaking to NHS sites, the cyber resilience program, and as David constantly says around maturity, it's, you could buy all the technology in the world, but to know whether they're actually working or not is another situation. I think, normal traditional pen testing that we see today is just a snapshot in time. It's just taking a photo, and that photo is pretty much useless in the next few minutes because things can change. So how do you continuously validate these security tools that you've purchased, and making sure that things the vulnerabilities that you assess are actually exploitable, and that's the difference. But yeah, it's kind of on the roadmap, isn't it, David? Some of the stuff that we're doing around.
It most definitely is. So from an NHS national perspective, you're supposed to have pen testing of your environment once a year. Out of that pen testing, you get a big list of actions to do, and you've got a year to do them in. It's a tick in the box exercise, because the following day something new comes along, you're probably vulnerable to it. The nice thing that we have with the combination of SIES and Vectra, and they are products from different companies, which rather amusingly use each other to baseline each other. So it wasn't really realized until about a year ago that these two companies had actually been fighting it out for some time. SIES will automatically pen test your environment on a schedule set by you, and it can do it automatically and permanently, and it will be continually fighting against Vectra, and you'll be able to see from each one whether one's winning or the other's winning. Today, according to Brett, Vectra's won.
Yeah,
But
it apparently annoys SIES.
Yeah.
No, I know, but I think it's good because it does what you want, right? And instead of doing it once a year, that's why I like the concept of automated pen testing. It's constantly putting your analyst, not just the product, but your analysts, and constantly raising their game, their education, their knowledge, right? And that's what's really useful to, as a CISO, that's almost the holy pair, if I may, not Trinity. Let's not talk about that, but just the two most important things I would want to constantly up my analyst game is, one, the automated triage, automated enrichment, and then the automated pen testing. I know time is running out. There's so many questions. There's a quick one that came up. Does this provide protection against ransomware? Protection is a very bad word, but let's just rephrase it. Maybe does it help in detecting ransomware attacks? Andy, quick one, and David, and then we're going to start wrapping up.
Yeah, it does. It has a specific detection for ransomware, and obviously it can see things like files being encrypted in a rapid fashion. And obviously that detection comes up on the dashboard.
Excellent. So, David, if you don't mind, if you take a minute max to give your closing thoughts on, how this has helped you, and hopefully, as you said, made your life easier. Andy, I'll come to you. James, you, and then I'll take the final close.
Okay, so from our perspective, this will continue to be rolled out as part of a roadmap in Greater Manchester, where we can and where we have funding for it. The fact that it can respond in real time is absolutely fundamental. So I'll share one story, and I'll be quick with this. Many years ago, I went to do a job interview for a major national telecoms company, and I asked them, bearing in mind the work that I'd done on intrusion detection systems, all the nodes for all the networks in Britain came into one particular room in one particular building on one particular site that belonged to them. If there was something nasty on one of those networks that could propagate, how would they stop it? And I was told they could implement a firewall rule to prevent it from happening within 24 hours. So if you consider WannaCry that hit us within milliseconds, 24 hours, you don't stand a chance. Now, that was a lot of years ago. And
That says it all, doesn't it, David? I
things.
mean, that short statement says it all. Absolutely valuable. Thank you, David. David, thank you so much. Andy, over to you, sir.
Yeah, obviously, like I said, we've had Vectra in for a while. One thing that you can build into the product is integrations with other products to do the automated close down of a detection that it's seen. So that is something we're looking into, but have not implemented as yet.
Excellent. Thank you, James.
I think there's multiple technology that we work with. Andy and I have completed multiple projects now. Password complexity enforcer, privilege access management, data discovery, and with David with Vectra and SIEM, and forever looking at new solutions. I think one thing I always mention around Brett and Bolton. Another relationship. If you were to ask an organization, what would you be most fearful of losing out from your network security stack? What would it be? And they always say Vectra, because to lose that visibility of what's going on inside is more valuable now than what's going on coming in.
Excellent. James, thank you so much. Like I said, we could be here for long, but thank you to all the panelists, David, Andrew, and the wonderful, look at those glasses there, James. I need my turban and my beard. I don't need anything else. Thank you to everyone and the panelists. Please remember to download. Core to Cloud obviously deserves a big thank you. And without doubt, Kelly, she deserves a big thank you for... She's going to get me a bonus anyway. I'm just kidding. But thank you to everyone listening in. It's been a real pleasure. And keep coming back. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
All right.